Moon over Monona Terrace is supported by a grant from the Alliant Energy Foundation and in partnership with the Madison Astronomical Society and the Madison Metropolitan School District. And with that, I'll hand it over to Geoff Holt and John Rummel. Thank you both.
All right. Well, so happy to have so many people with us, although I certainly wish that we were together in an auditorium at Monona Terrace or in the Planetarium, but so happy that we can do this as an alternative. What we're going to do is to take you on a virtual tour of the night sky, and we're going to look at star patterns, teach you how to find planets, and one of the things I like to start by is kind of giving us a rationale for why we would want to look for these star patterns. And to me, it's multiple reasons. For one thing, it helps us to find our place in the cosmos, to be looking out into the cosmos. And the changes that we see help us to notice the passage of time and the motions that happen on our planet and other celestial objects over time. But I think also there is kind of a nostalgia where the star patterns become our old friends. When you see them again, I get a feeling of kind of a sense of order and calm and even joy at seeing these familiar star patterns. Hopefully you will too. So in this session, we're going to just give you an overview of some of the easiest things to spot in the sky. And then in the next session, we'll go a little bit deeper. So if you want to stay with us after 8 o'clock, we will go in deeper and find some more constellations and star patterns that are much more challenging. The simulation system that we're using here is a program called Stellarium. If you want to write down how to spell it, that's where the word is. And it is a free program. It is available on multiple platforms, desktop computers. And if I didn't mention it, it is free. In the simulation, you can see that we're imagining that we're in a beautiful park here with a gentleman socially distanced here, down here toward the south. That's what that S is indicating. So where it looks like the sky is touching the ground, that's the horizon. And you can see all the way from the southwest to the southeast in the simulation, and we have the sun up here. I have it set for here in Madison, and then the date and the time I have it set for today's date, but 15 o'clock would be 3 p.m. And I'm going to be using a lot of keyboard shortcuts. So you're going to see things changing, and I'll mention what I'm doing. But sometimes you won't be able to tell how I'm controlling the simulation. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and fast forward through the rest of the daytime, change over to nighttime so that we can see those beautiful stars. Now I've clicked once and you can start to see the seconds ticking away here. So obviously in real time, the sky doesn't change very fast. So I'm going to tap L a couple of times here, and now you can see this, the seconds ticking away mildly or wildly, and the minutes ticking away pretty fast as well. You can see the sun's position now appearing to change. Now, remember though, that that's not the sun moving. That's actually the Earth's spin. Now I'm going to probably stay here a little bit. But now I want to slow it down again. All right, so you can start to see the moon rising over here in the east. Sun is still above the horizon. Sometimes that confuses people because they kind of forget that you can see the moon in the daytime. The moon spends half of its time in the daytime sky and half of its time in the nighttime sky. Now I'm going to speed things up a little bit more, and we'll fast forward past sunset. Now I'm going to stop at about 6:30. That will be about 30 minutes past sunset. And by that time, you're starting to see a few of the brightest celestial objects out there in space. If we followed where the sun set over here, it set a little bit to the south of west, and we're seeing one bright star here, and that actually is a star. Now, when I click on something here, you'll see the name and the distance for that object up here. This is a bright, fairly close star called Arcturus. And then if we look back toward the south, you'll see our first quarter moon here. And then two things here that look like bright stars. Now, these other stars here, I know that you would not be able to see them yet 30 minutes past sunset. Stellarium is a little bit generous as far as like how many stars you would see in this twilight hour. But what we're seeing here are not actually stars, they are planets. Saturn and Jupiter, Jupiter being the brighter of the two. Now, the moon's position will change not just because of the Earth's rotation, but because the moon has a motion of its own. So let's jump back to the most recent new moon, which was on the 16th. So now I changed the date down here to 16, and you see that we're not seeing the moon. Well, let's click ahead one day at a time. And a couple of days past a new moon on the 18th, if it had been clear, we could have seen a very thin crescent moon over by the sunset. And you could also see that we're seeing the nighttime side. That's not a fault in Stellarium. That's actually sunlight being reflected off of the Earth and back onto the nighttime side of the moon. Now, as we go forward each day, you're seeing the moon farther and farther toward the east as it orbits around the Earth. And we're back to being caught up to today. Notice that the sun is over here in this direction, and it's shining on that side of the moon, making that the daytime side of the moon. Now, if we continue forward, one day at a time, you start to see more and more of that daytime side of the moon. And by the 28th and the 29th, the moon will be over here by another planet. That's actually the planet Mars. Now, Mars is going to look like a really bright kind of orangish star, and it doesn't always look this bright. About 10 days ago, we were at our closest point to Mars, and that was when Mars was at its closest and brightest, but it's still pretty close to being that brightest. And so it is almost startlingly bright when you see it out there. Now, it's not a full moon yet. I know it looks like a full moon, but it won't actually be a full moon until Halloween. Now, it's actually pretty rare for it to be a full moon on Halloween. And in fact, this won't happen again until 2039. So enjoy it. All right, let's go back to today's date. And now we're a little bit past sunset, and we said that we can only see a few of the brightest objects. We wouldn't be able to see this many stars, but we want to see more stars. So let's go later into the night. By about 7:30, let's go just a little bit later. 7:30, about an hour and a half after sunset, the sky would be fully dark. And in fact, for a couple of the star patterns I'd like to highlight, let's go just a little bit later. Now, probably the star pattern that the most people at least know about, even if you don't know like how to find it, it would be the Big Dipper. Well, we're not going to find the Big Dipper in the southern part of the sky. We'll always see the Big Dipper somewhere on the north half of the sky. So I'm just going to jump to the north. Now you can see the N here. Now, if you already know what the Big Dipper looks like, go ahead and see if you can spot it before I point it out. This time of the year, it is actually right side up, but it's not very high in the sky. So at your house, this time of the year and into early winter, you might not even notice the Big Dipper because you might have trees or houses blocking your view. So the hint is look low toward the northern horizon. There it is. So this part we call the handle. This part is the bowl. And so that is representing what people would have used long ago to get a drink of water out of a bucket, like a ladle to scoop water out of that bucket. Now, once we find the Big Dipper, we can use the Big Dipper, these two stars at the end of the bowl of the Big Dipper, as like an arrow pointing up to the North Star. Notice that it's not the brightest star in the sky, the way a lot of people imagine it would be. In fact, it's only the 49th brightest, in case you're counting. And then the North Star is at the end of the handle of the Little Dipper, which you usually won't find in Madison. What we're showing you here is a sky away from all the city lights, and you're as if your eyes are fully dark adapted. And so you do have to get out away from the city lights in order to see all of those dim stars in the Little Dipper. Now let's look back to the south again. Now we've been showing you things close to the horizon because I think that's a little bit easier to start with, but you're most likely to be able to see things directly over your head outside because there's less likely to have obstructions, trees or houses blocking your view. This Z here and that plus sign, that's marking the spot that would be directly above your head outside. So notice that this bright star here, by the time it's fully dark, this time of the year, it's literally almost directly over our heads. That's a star called Deneb, and it's at the tail of a constellation called Cygnus the Swan. I'll put up the name so you can see how to spell that. Cygnus the Swan, Deneb is the tail, and the head stretches out to here, long neck, and then the wings stretch out this way and that way. I'll put up some artwork in case that helps you to imagine. So Deneb is actually one corner of a triangle that we call the summer triangle. So take a look at Deneb here, and then I'm going to put my arrow at the center of that triangle. See if you can find the other two bright stars. Hopefully you found Vega up here. Vega is in the constellation of Lyra. Lyra the liar, not as in someone that doesn't tell the truth, but as in a small harp that you would hold in your lap. But what I see when I look at Lyra is a parallelogram, like a rectangle that somebody sat on with a tail. Maybe more like this. But in any case, the constellation is Lyra, and the bright star is Vega. All right, here's the center of the triangle again. Find the other star. Did you pick out that one? That's a star called Altair, and I'll bring Altair up a little bit higher in our field of view so that we can see the whole constellation. It's in a constellation called Aquila. Aquila the eagle. Now that's kind of the way I connect the dots, but not exactly. I'll show you the artwork in case that helps you to understand it, but I'll also show you the way I kind of picture it. I imagine Altair as like the eye, and then I can either picture the beak facing this way or that way, depending on which way the bird's head is pointed. And then I imagine a wing coming out like this and a wing coming out like this, and stick figure legs for the eagle. So we've got Altair, Vega, and Deneb as the 3 stars in the summer triangle. Now we call that the summer triangle because back in June, it would have been opposite the sun, so that as the sun was setting, the summer triangle would have been just rising. So you would have to wait a few hours for it to be high in the sky. Now, in fall, it's already high in the sky by the time the sky gets dark. And in case you're wondering, yes, there is a shape for fall as well. Now, to help you kind of get oriented here, we're looking toward the east and southeast where we saw Mars. Looking up above Mars, my arrow is at the center of a square. It's kind of tipped on one corner. See if you can pick it out. That's the great square of Pegasus. And Pegasus is in a constellation that you might actually know that it is an animal constellation. It's, well, do you know? Do you know that it's a horse? But it's not just any old horse. Yep, I know some of you know it. It's a flying horse. But did you know that it's even more unique than that? No, it's not a unicorn. It doesn't have a horn coming out of its head. But it is an upside down flying front half of a horse. All right, so let me see if I can help you with that. First of all, we'll put name Pegasus back up. So this is the front half of the body. And then the long neck and the nose. And then the front legs. Here, we'll put in the lines. Here's the head, front half of the body, and the front legs. Now you don't see the back half of the body, even in the artwork, because Pegasus formed when a drop of the Medusa's blood fell into the ocean and mixed with sea foam. And everybody knows sea foam plus Medusa blood equals flying horse. And so Pegasus is rising up out of the water, getting ready to fly. Now in the next session, when we go deeper into some of the more difficult constellations, one of the constellations we're going to do is Pegasus again, because we're going to be looking at the water part of the sky. Some of the constellations have themes and will be grouped together, because constellations, like I said, it's a way to show the passage of time. People actually use constellations and things that happen in the sky as a clock, a compass, a calendar. And so these groups of constellations and the stories that go along with them were a way for them to pass on this knowledge from one generation to the next. Now we're getting pretty close to the end of our scheduled time. John, did we have any questions that came up that that you want to address?
No, just a couple of procedural questions, and somebody asked about Stellarium, and I gave them that information, but no questions about the sky yet. So if you got any questions, folks, go ahead and throw them in there.
Well, and while we're waiting, so let me just kind of show you where Pegasus is in relation to the summer triangle. All right. So here's our summer triangle. And remember, that's directly overhead. So that's going to be pretty high in the sky. But also notice that the stars in Pegasus, none of those are as bright as those 3 stars that you'd be looking for directly over your head outside to get the summer triangle. But the autumn square, if you get to a spot where you don't have any direct light shining on you, maybe at a park, or find a spot in your yard where you don't have a street light shining on you, let your eyes get dark adapted, and you should at least be able to see the square. I see some questions coming in.
So Geoff, let me go ahead and feed you a question.
Sure.
Sarah asked, how do people know about the constellations? And I'm thinking she might be asking, like, where did the ideas and the characters come from?
Some of these constellations are, 4,000 years old, and they were passed on from one generation to the next by people telling stories like we were talking about. And then at some point, since each culture had their own constellation stories and their own ways of interpreting the sky, the International Astronomical Union wanted a way to have a common vocabulary for the different parts of the sky. And so they came up with a way to have the whole sky divided up into patches of sky that we now call constellations. And it was based mostly on Greek and Roman mythology. But there are wonderful histories of indigenous people here in the United States having constellation stories as well.
Somebody asked if they can see Venus now.
In the early morning hours before sunrise. So if you remember where we saw Mars over in the east, looking like a bright star, if you got up half hour before sunrise and you look toward the east, you should be able to see Venus.
And somebody asked if the autumn square, the fall square, and the summer triangle are called something different for our friends down under in the southern hemisphere.
Well, some of these stars, depending on how far south they are, some of these stars are far enough north that they may not actually even be able to see them. But if they're close to the equator, they would still be visible to people in the southern hemisphere. It would just be upside down, probably from their perspective. But according to the official names that we go by today, they would go by the same names. It's just that each culture had their own traditions. So there are, South American traditions in different parts of South America, and different cultures in Africa had their own traditions. It's really actually lovely to learn about. It's something you might want to look into.
Makiko wants to know, Geoff, what is your favorite constellation?
Well, that kind of varies. Orion is always one of my favorites, but Pegasus is up there too. Maybe I just like thinking of an upside down flying front half of a horse rising up out of the water.
Kelly wants to know about seeing the International Space Station. I was wondering if you just want to put a comment in how you can find the ISS.
Yeah, so one of my favorite places for getting predictions for when the International Space Station is going to fly overhead is heavens-above.com. And you can put in your location, and then you'll see ISS 10-day predictions as one of the options there. NASA also has a function where you can subscribe to get an email or a text message anytime the space station is going to fly over your location. And so if you just do a search for NASA ISS predictions, I'll bet those 3 words would get you there.
Somebody wants to know who was responsible for naming the constellations.
Well, especially the star names, we go by mostly like Arabic traditions, and except for the newer constellations that were filled in to fill in the gaps, most of these constellations are from 3,000 and 4,000 years ago.
Kathy wants to know if you can see Pluto.
Pluto, unfortunately, even in a backyard telescope, is really hard to find. And when you do, it just looks like a dim star. And so it's definitely a challenge.
So we do have a bunch more questions. I've tried to answer some of them with text, but we're only 4 minutes away from starting the next one. So I think we probably ought to start to reset and get ready for our next program.
I'll tell you what we can do. I see one question in there where is Orion right now? So Orion is a winter constellation. So let me actually zoom out a little bit more so you can get kind of a better picture of like the whole sky. And so we're still facing toward the south. Summer triangle is here. Autumn square is here. Orion is a winter constellation. And so summer, fall, winter comes next. So Orion would be visible tonight. You would just have to stay up late enough for those winter constellations to rise. And with that, I'll say, yes, we probably should take a moment to get set up for the next program.